Jersey City Mayor Steve Fulop is hoping to move his office 63 miles down the turnpike to Trenton, New Jersey. There's so many issues to talk to you about.
Yep.
But first, I'd like to talk to you about something that we get a lot of complaints about, NJ Transit. People complain constantly about that organization. If you got elected governor, what would you do?
Let me start by saying it's broken.
Yes, everybody knows that.
Yeah, Phil Murphy made a promise, and I think it's a failure. I think there's a couple things that you could do from the gubernatorial standpoint initially. It's a big part of our platform, obviously. And initially, you could cancel the Turnpike widening project in Hudson
That would have been
County.
my second question.
Yeah, it's $12 billion, and it's a silly project because it's not going to alleviate traffic.
But what would you put that money into NJ Transit?
Yeah, we would put it directly into expansion of the light rail because I think you need more infrastructure. We have a tax that was put in place for 5 years, a corporate business tax. It was actually our suggestion initially on companies that make more than $10 million, but it was only done for 5 years. And you can't bond against a 5-year revenue, so you need to structure that differently so that way we can upgrade our facilities. The buses are privatized. You need to bring that back in-house. PATH need to be moved from the Port Authority actually into New Jersey Transit, and that's a conversation with the Port Authority.
Would the Port Authority agree to that?
They would, because it's kind of like this stepchild that's neglected currently, like both New York and New Jersey.
But where would you get the money to fix it?
So today it has to ultimately be some sort of phase-in over a couple years with regards to PATH. But the reality is that it's neglected today because nobody wants to take ownership for it. And you need to be responsible and just say it's more of a New Jersey asset than it is a New York asset. And so if it continues to get neglected like it has since 9/11, we're going to see the downside on economic development and growth.
So there are some people, including some people running for the Republican nomination for governor, Jack Ciattarelli for one, who have suggested that you take the gas tax and roll that into some kind of a program that helps you to rehabilitate transit in New Jersey overall, especially NJ Transit. But you could also use it for PATH and for other things. What's your take on that?
I think the reality is the gas tax has to be revisited because you're getting more electrification of vehicles. So the whole concept of a gas tax today doesn't work the same way it did 5 or 10 years ago. I think Jack Ciattarelli is living in a world of 5 or 10 years ago and how he's approaching that. And I think that the reality is that there's not enough money in the gas tax today to do the infrastructure for the Turnpike and the Parkway. I think you really need to think about that corporate business tax and expansion on the wealthiest companies in order to make sure that you're funding New Jersey Transit because they benefit from it.
Do you think there's an appetite in Trenton to expand the gas tax, expand the business tax, corporately for a long period of time? I mean, you could put it in perpetuity, but is there an appetite for doing that?
I think if you have a strong governor, there is. And the reality is that those corporations have had record earnings over the last 5 years. So I don't think that you're able to make the argument that it's hurt them on the bottom line. And they benefit from New Jersey Transit. I mean, if New Jersey is going to grow, you need a robust transportation system. So
New Jersey, Jersey City, where you are the mayor right now, just had to cope with a very tragic helicopter accident. And there have been some calls to restrict tourist helicopters. But the mayor of New York City says that's a bad idea because there's $75 million in that industry that brings money to both New Jersey and New York. What's your position on that?
I mean, Eric and I disagree on this, and I've been public on that. For a long time, I've said that it's a very crowded airspace. If that helicopter from a couple weeks ago had crashed 100 yards towards Jersey, a little bit more, it would have been in the middle of a highway. The airspace here is just very crowded. You have the news helicopters, you have transit helicopters, you have tourist helicopters, and then you have LaGuardia, Newark, and JFK. And I think any reasonable person would say it is very congested for a tight area, and it's getting more congested, and that's beyond the quality of life issue. So I think it's reasonable to have some bans, and I think Mayor Adams is wrong.
So would you eliminate it totally?
I think that the reality is that it's not necessary from a tourist standpoint. That's the truth. I think that you could get the same outcome of seeing the skyline and taking pictures of the Statue of Liberty from boats, from the Brooklyn walkways, from the promenade, from Jersey City. And the reality is that this sort of crash will happen again. It's just a very busy airspace, and I think that you should eliminate those tourist helicopters.
So another thing that's happening in New Jersey now is a wildfire that's still burning out of control. And the question is this: there's one this year, there was one last year. it's an ongoing problem. If you were elected governor, what steps would you take to try to prevent that, the fact, and to deal with maybe new technology for dealing with these big, out-of-control fires?
Look, I think the reality is that you have a president today that doesn't believe in climate change. And so from the governor's standpoint for New Jersey, you need to be thoughtful of how we move that conversation forward without federal help. And I think there's a lot that you can do, particularly around the firefighting component as far as infrastructure and dollars. I think there's a lot you can do on climate change, on open space without relying on the federal government. But the climate change conversation has become more and more front and center because New Jersey used to never have these sort of huge fires, and you're getting
and now
them more,
it's like almost commonplace.
Yeah, it's getting commonplace, which speaks to the fact that there's less water and there's warmer temperature and drier forests, and all these things kind of play into it.
So in terms of electric rates, another concern of New Jersey, electric rates are supposed to go up in New Jersey on June 1st between 17 and 20%. Nobody's happy about that.
Yeah.
Is there anything that the governor can do to bring down the cost of power in the state?
Well, let me start by saying there's a lot of finger pointing going on between Republicans and Democrats.
Yes, there is.
And I think at the core of the issue in New Jersey, you have something called the BPU, which is the Board of Public Utilities, which is responsible for power and infrastructure. And it's become this dumping ground for former politicians. There's no energy experts there. And I think that at the core of the problem is you have a BPU that's kind of deviated from their core mission. That's a longer term fix that you need more energy experts and environmentalists on it. Today, I mean, you need to think about kind of who we get our energy from, the intermediaries. There's a lot of finger pointing around that. And as governor,
what about new ways of power? I mean, the president has gone after wind farms. Some people think you should have more nuclear power. Whatever, are there ways, are there new forms of energy that you could support as governor that might help to bring down the cost?
I am all for renewable energy, so I lean into that harder than most. And the reason is because I have a 6-year-old.
Solar power?
Solar power, wind energy. I think that the reality is that the president is supportive of wind energy, but New Jersey should be setting up for the next administration in order to get the procurement and legal paperwork in place so we can move forward. I mean, we missed the boat over the last 8 years because we were slow, but the reality is that you have an environmental crisis in the world. You see it in places like New Jersey, and I think that New Jersey needs to lean in a little bit more into the conversation.
Another issue roiling the waters in Trenton is the proposal in Governor Murphy's budget to increase the alcohol tax by 10%. Small businesses are screaming that they're going to have to pay more to buy alcohol products, whether it's wine or beer or hard liquor.
Yeah.
And they say it's going to be hard on businesses, and given everything else that's happening in the country, it's just going to make another step of driving them out of business. Do you think it's ill-advised, or it's a good thing because of so much money is being made?
I think that the small businesses have a valid argument in saying that at this moment in time, it's probably not who you want to be squeezing. You know, the way the budget is structured in Trenton, you've seen massive amount of increase since COVID dollars were there. Republicans point to that, and they have a valid argument on that. And then you see about $1 billion in these Christmas tree items, which are kind of special projects. And I think that those are probably the places that you should kind of focus on first before you squeeze small business.
Mayor Fulop, we're going to have to leave it right there for now, but our conversation continues right after the show on our streaming channel, CBS News New York. We are back with Democratic gubernatorial candidate Steve Fulop. You know, 11 states have sued the federal government to try to stop the tariffs from going into effect, but New Jersey is not one of them. I'm wondering if that's a misstep on the part of Governor Murphy.
Well, the Attorney General, I think, operates more independently in New Jersey. It's an appointment from the governor. Matt Plotkin, who's been the Attorney General, has done a really good job of litigation, pushing back on the Trump administration's policies that impact New Jersey. I can't speak to why he hasn't participated in that. I think New Jersey should be proactive if there's an avenue on that, but I wouldn't know the nuances.
Well, I mean, I just think that since so much shipping especially from China and other places, comes into the Jersey ports, Port Elizabeth and others, that you'd think that would be something that New Jersey would want to participate in, since it could really hurt the shipping industry there.
I agree. I couldn't speak to why he hasn't. I'm not a lawyer, but I think New Jersey should have probably been more proactive, but there's probably a legal reason why he chose not to.
So let's talk about education. There's a group that's called Wake Up Call New Jersey.
Okay.
And it's trumpeting the fact that education has not been successful in the state of New Jersey. They have statistics that show that 55% of fourth graders can't do grade level math, and it gets worse as they go into sixth grade. What should be done? What should the state be doing to better educate the kids of New Jersey?
I think you could cherry pick stats, and I think that New Jersey also has highly regarded public schools. I think that part of the issue is you have huge disparities between good schools and poorer schools. And then New Jersey also has a school segregation issue that people don't realize, which is really front and center, and it hasn't been addressed.
So what would you do about it?
I think you need more magnet schools. I think you need to redo the school funding formula to incentivize schools to integrate a little bit more. You shouldn't have huge wealth gaps and school education gaps by people who live 3 miles away. And that's currently the situation in New Jersey. And the reason those stats are so poor is because you have some urban areas with pockets of terrible schools, and you have some great schools in urban areas, but the disparity is huge, and that's what really needs to be addressed in order to confront that.
So I think we're in a time when people are looking for change.
Yeah.
I wonder what change you offer to New Jersey voters that would make them vote for you.
Our campaign is the only one about political reform and government reform. We're kind of in this own lane about the political structure in New Jersey, the corruption tax that people pay.
So would you combine all the watchdog groups in watchdog offices?
No, I stand alone. I think that those watchdog groups are actually good. I think the fact that Trenton has moved to remove oversight via public records access and campaign finance laws, and now are looking to consolidate watchdog groups into less of them, is problematic. And I don't think that's probably the solution that you want to take in a time when people don't trust government to begin with.
I wonder what your thoughts are about the protests that have been going on college campuses, especially the ones that seem to target Israel and people who are Jewish.
Well, I don't think anybody should go to a school and feel uncomfortable because of hate and anti-Semitism. I think that freedom of speech is important, so you can't just unilaterally say that people shouldn't be able to protest, but I think you need to be really careful about the line where people feel that they're threatened, which has happened in places like Columbia and at times places like Rutgers. And in those situations, I think that the governor should have been more proactive.
So how do you feel about the president's pulling grants away from those schools where the protests have been taking place? I
think that Harvard standing up was a good step and the right thing to do. I think Columbia capitulating a couple of weeks ago was the wrong step to do. And
yet they were going, it has to do with the protests that are protesting Israel and anti-Semitism.
Yeah, but I don't think it's one way or the other. I think free speech and protests and conversations are good. I think what happened in Columbia was beyond the pale, but using levers of federal government to enforce what the president thinks is the right thing to do, you get into a slippery slope of what free speech is at universities. I don't think that it's productive for somebody to bend the knee just because they're threatened. I get it on the finances, I live it as an executive, but I think it's a dangerous place to be.
You know, you're the offspring of people who survived the Holocaust. Yeah. I wonder how that informs how you look at this as a policy issue.
Look, I mean, I'm very sensitive to anti-Semitism. I have 3 little kids. I have a Jewish wife. I have a Jewish household. I also have a lot of relationships in the Muslim community. I'm very sensitive to different religions. And I think, look, you're in a slippery slope here. And I think sometimes we feel like we're moving backwards. But freedom of speech is important as long as somebody doesn't feel personally threatened. And I think finding that line is really important. Hard to do, but really important.
But yet you recently posted a video that commemorates Yom HaShoah, which commemorates the lives lost during the Holocaust, which was incredibly moving. But I wonder, you know, so many people now don't believe that the Holocaust happened. And I wonder what you would say to those people. In fact, Governor Murphy, you know, went to Poland to participate in a march this past week that would dramatize the need for a concern about the Holocaust, but also the growing anti-Semitism in the world?
I think my parents would say that it feels like we're moving backwards. My parents would say that it feels like the stories they heard from their parents prior to being shipped out to Auschwitz, that how Jewish people are targeted. I think you see it even at city council meetings, that some people come times and they blame Jews for affordable housing issues. They blame them for energy issues, things that are unrelated. And, you know, the reason I posted that is to share firsthand my mother and my grandmother talking about their experience. But, you know, there's 6 million Jews that died. A lot of people in the LGBTQ community, a lot of gypsies died, and all because of how they identified. And it's really important that we highlight that, because it's very fragile, the progress that we've made.
So what could be done?
Education. I think more and more awareness and education is really, really important. And I think that sometimes New Jersey needs to be more proactive in recognizing anti-Semitism when it first rears its head. You know, we had a mass shooting in Jersey City a couple of years ago that was clearly anti-Semitic. And at the time, the Attorney General, who is a different Attorney General, was reluctant to call it an anti-Semitic attack. And I don't think if it was any other community, it would have been the same sort of slowness to respond that it is anti-Semitic.
So do you think there should be more education, like Holocaust education courses in schools in New Jersey? And do you think it should, and in what age should it start at?
I think the earlier that you could start, that somebody, I'm not an educator by profession, but I think that the earlier that you could start with somebody understanding and having an actual conversation. I mean, the stories of what happened there are quite gruesome and terrible, but I think that the rawness of it is important to explain to people because it's less than 100 years away, 100 years ago. So I do think that at the earliest age that people can digest and comprehend it, you need to start talking about those sort of things in a responsible way.
I think it's hard for people to understand that 6 million people lost their lives. That's a big number.
6 million, and it's less than 100 years ago.
But yet there's still such anti-Semitism now.
Yeah, I think, again, you know, the best thing we could do is education. The best thing that you could do is education, and start early and funding that.
So the New Jersey gubernatorial primary is early June?
June 10th, yeah.
I know it's June 10th. So you have a month and a half, almost 2 months to go?
45 days.
45 days.
Yeah,
so what's the best thing about campaigning? And what's the worst thing?
I mean, I'm tired, so that's the downside. And with 3 little kids at home, it only adds to how tired I am. But I enjoy getting around the state. I like these meet and greets where you have, you know, kind of a town hall atmosphere where there's 100, 150 people and you're talking about issues. I like the fact that we're growing and we have a huge volunteer base and we're surging. And I think we're going to be successful in a big upset on June 10th.
And you're running with a running mate, which is unusual.
Yeah, so our entire campaign has been about political reform and doing things a little bit differently, and it's caught on. In most other states where there's a lieutenant governor, they're selected prior to the primary. And I think it's a good thing for transparency and people to know what your administration will look like. In New Jersey, it's historically done differently. And we said, you know what, we're going to do it like other states. It kind of makes sense to have that out there, and she's a terrific partner. And she only adds to the campaign and adds to the type of government.
Mayor of South Orange.
Yeah, she is dynamic, and she's different than me in the sense that I think mayors are important, but she comes from a suburban, different sort of town, 20,000 people. And I'm from a larger city, the second largest in New Jersey.
So let's delve into you a little bit. So if you had to make breakfast, what would your specialty be? We're going to end with this question.
I mean, I don't make complicated things. I'll make for my kids like scrambled eggs and toast. That's it.
That's it? Scrambled eggs and toast?
That's it. That's it. It doesn't get that much more complicated for breakfast. I'm not a big breakfast person, to be perfectly
honest. So you don't
eat
breakfast at all?
I mean, I didn't have breakfast today. I don't usually eat breakfast. I try to kind of go as long as I can without eating meals, to be perfectly honest with you. You know, on this campaign trail, you spend a lot of time with people and everybody wants you to eat with them. And so if I actually participated in every one of those, I'd be like 300 pounds. And so I've kind of taken the approach of saying, you know, I'm just going to kind of stick to a very rigid, structured way of kind of dieting.
Mayor Steve Fulop,
thank you.
Who wants to be governor, thank you for joining me.
You.
And thank you at home for joining us as well.